Hey everyone, it's Dr. B. Do you ever wonder why things just push your buttons and annoy you for what seems kind of like no reason at all? And sometimes annoy you for really good reason? Well, we all have triggers, and that happens to all of us because what triggers do is they activate our stress response system. And we did get a little neurobiological with you for a bit, but break it down so it's simple to understand. Our brain is in service of survival. Our brain, we use our brain to protect ourselves. It tells us things to do in order to stay safe. And so triggers, especially triggers from trauma, previous trauma, help us to remember in our brain, hey, that was important. You better pay attention. I'm going to trigger you when something similar to that happens again in your life so you're prepared. And so triggers are actually very, very useful for us and important, again, like I said, to survival. They live in our mind and we feel them in our body and we experience them regularly. Sometimes they're just kind of no big deal, and other times they can be very, very activating and distressing for people. So let's talk a little bit more about that. A trigger is something that can happen in a lot of different ways. So we could have a sensory trigger where somebody comes and they maybe like brush our arm a certain way and it activates us for some reason. And we have an emotional reaction to that because it activates something within our brain called the limbic system. There's a whole system deep inside our brain that says, okay, we're your emotional response system. We're really old and we've been with you since the very beginning of your life, and we remember things. We may not always have words for those things that happen to you, but we remember them in your body. And so when we remember things in our body, when somebody touches us a certain way, it activates us and it reminds us of what that touch meant. And that can be, quote unquote, a trigger. It can be a loving touch or it can be a traumatic touch. It can be either or. So that's one thing to understand that's really important, is that we have this limbic system, emotional system going on deep inside our brain. If you want to read more about it, there's a book called The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. And he's really a cutting edge trauma expert around how to treat serious trauma in people who obviously have experienced severe trauma in their lifetimes. So, but back to our triggers. Okay, it could be a sensory trigger. Maybe it's a visual trigger and I just see something and all of a sudden I think, oh my gosh, that person dresses just like this person and I didn't like that person. And so I have this emotional reaction like, I don't think I'm going to like that person either because, it's a visual trigger. We didn't like what they were wearing because deep down. Now, weirdly, it's unconscious. So a lot of times we just have this feeling like, I'm not going to like that person, but we don't really know why. That's why it's important to learn how to know your own mind and to get familiar with your own mind. So when you have this feeling, you have no reason to not like this person. So ask yourself, what's going on with me that's activating this reaction to this person? So that's part of it too, is knowing your mind helps us to be able to soothe our own mind as we go forward in the day or whatever is happening. Now, sometimes triggers are much bigger events and they're really rooted in something that happened that was very traumatic, either early in life, or it can even be something that happened recently. So understanding how the body reacts is important to know. I'm going to give you an example, one that's kind of, funny, not funny, because it actually happened to me when I was a kid, about 7. And even though I'm a complete and total dog lover and I'm not afraid of any kind of dog, don't bring a St. Bernard around me. I know they're precious, they're cute, they're big and fluffy and all sorts of things. I'm terrified of St. Bernards. I'll tell you why in a sec. And another story I'm going to tell you about is around sexual assault and triggers. All right, so the first story is about St. Bernards. My brother and I had a friend. He lives across the street from us. He has this big, fluffy, cool St. Bernard. We used to play with him. We didn't know him super well, but he wasn't like a vicious dog or anything, you know. So we go over to this kid's house, knock on the door to see if we can play. I'm 7, my brother's 8. The kid opens the door, and all of a sudden this, 200-pound Saint Bernard jumps up, hits my brother in the face with his mouth open, knocks him to the ground, and my brother's bleeding. People are screaming. I don't even know what happened. I just remember seeing towels of blood, my parents coming, him going to the hospital, and I sat in my neighbor's living room waiting for somebody to come and tell me my brother died. So that was a humongously traumatic experience for me to watch. And it was obviously a traumatic experience for my brother. We've never really talked about St. Bernards together, but I have a feeling that we both really truly understand why Cujo is a terrifying movie. But anyway, so that's a trigger, that's a trauma for me. So there was a day, I don't know, 30 years later, I'm walking into a nursery that's outdoors, and I have a baby in a stroller and a little walking on my side, and all of a sudden I see 2 gigantic St. Bernards who are literally part of this nursery, kind of galunk walking on the sidewalk in the nursery place. And I immediately had a panic. Like my stress response activated. All I could feel in my body was those things were going to attack us and my children, and I was petrified. So what do we do with that? That is my brain saying, okay, remember the last time this St. Bernard thing happened? You need to protect yourself because it's a threat. So it's the brain is in service of survival. It's working for me. But then is it realistic? Is every single St. Bernard in the world a problem or going to attack just on a whim? Probably not. So that's work that I can do in order to support my own growth and development around easing my own trigger around St. Bernards. Okay, I'm going to share another one with you, and this is around sexual assault. There is no question that women live in fear of sexual assault and that it is a threat to women at all times, pretty much. So, and I'm not going to shy away from that because we need to be talking about this, because women are being harmed, and we set up all kinds of roadblocks for them then to get justice for their perpetrators. So here's another one. Our most sensitive sensory system in our body is our smell. It's called olfactory. Our smell is the most sensitive system. So interestingly, when women are sexually assaulted, it's a very intimate process. It's a very intimate act. And things are coming at them through their senses, through their entire body. But one of the things that's the most powerful is smell. So if we were to take a lineup of people who were sexual assault potential, criminals, and asked a woman not to visually identify their sexual assault person, but to smell them. Okay, I know. It sounds weird. Hey, we're going to smell all these men. Nobody would even want to necessarily get that close to them. However, smell their clothing. It would be a much more accurate way to identify the perpetrator than visual identification. Because a lot of times people wear masks, they do all these kinds of things. It's important to realize that our brain is in service of survival, so it logs things deeply within that limbic system in order to help us remember and survive if that ever happens again. And that's where we come into doing our own work and soothing our mind and soothing our body through what work do I need to do around these triggers, and what should I save as in service of survival. So with that, I hope that next time you run into somebody who kind of pushes your buttons or activates a trigger, that you can run through some of these ideas. So with that, leave a life where they go.